And I found that New Haven Climate Movement, which was previously a predominantly adult organization, was asking for volunteers. And so I emailed and met the sort of overseer, Chris Schweischer, and with another activist, Adrian Huck, who was at the time at Metropolitan Business Academy. We began collaborating on events, and it was pretty much just me being thrown into the deep end. And we started rallying for the climate emergency resolution. And this was basically a really progressive timeline for climate action that we wanted the city to take. And the reason I stayed involved was due to my concern towards climate migration and displacement, especially in places like Honduras, coming from an immigrant family and having a dad who was displaced by Hurricane Mitch in 1998. I saw that connection between climate change and these communities that I've loved so much. And I then began to see that climate change was not just a foreign issue or even a future issue. It is something that affects even New Haven communities, and especially with things like asthma rates and such. I realized how big of a role climate change has on hurting communities of color specifically. And what I do now with the organization is I play an administrative role, and I'm a frequent public speaker. So some of our accomplishments: pushing the Board of Alders to ratify the climate emergency resolution. So they passed this in 2019. And again, it was just a really progressive timeline to raise climate awareness and cut carbon emissions in New Haven. Since then, we've also hosted multiple successful rallies, such as our September 20th and 2019 Fridays for Future Global Strike Day. And we've become leaders on climate policy and awareness in New Haven. And I'll go into some of our projects later on as well. And it's really amazing to see how many New Haven youth from all different high schools and areas have gotten involved with New Haven climate movement, because the people I've worked with, it's so inspiring to see them very excited to rally on climate change and taking these really big roles with organizing meetings and such. So yeah, just a shout out to all of our youth that worked with us. And these are just some pictures from the transition team. So we recommended goals for the Elicker administration back in January of 2020. And the part I helped co-write was the environment and climate change. So we basically established a timeline of different actions we wanted the mayor specifically to take against climate change. And here are just some of our more recent rallies. Through COVID, we've still been able to hold a few rallies here and there, and putting pressure on the city to, again, take more climate action. And so to get into our projects, right now we have 4 projects going on, and these are the 3 committees we have. We have our Climate Education Committee that is working with the Board of Education to enact a climate justice schools proposal. So this is a proposal asking for a 5-school high school pilot program for this next fall to increase climate education within schools. And this would happen in an interdisciplinary manner, meaning that students would receive more climate education throughout each subject every year in high school. And so right now we are currently waiting for the Board of Education to vote on the proposal and hopefully getting it passed very soon. And for electrification, we are currently trying to work with the city engineer to try and electrify buildings and transportation in New Haven as a means of cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And recently we had our electrification resolution passed. And this was basically outlining a timeline for electrification and some more specifications on what we wanted as an organization, the city, to do in terms of electrifying our buildings. And we also have our CT Green New Deal group, which is more of a statewide group that is working to reach out to shoreline communities in Connecticut and their government officials. So these include some state senators and communities like New Haven and Guilford that are right along the coast. And so I'd like to think of it as our really biggest push right now is advocating for our Climate Justice Green Jobs Fund. So this is a proposal that asks the city to allocate 0.2% of the city's budget towards climate action. So the proposal stipulates staffing for different climate roles. So to hire staff to work on energy efficiency education, energy policies, clean energy jobs, alternative transportation, et cetera. And also roles for staff to support climate education and neighborhood resilience. So something that we've always talked about with New Haven Climate Movement is really the need for the city to have people who are working on these issues 24/7 and are finding the entry points within other departments to start acknowledging climate change as a sort of department and having staff working on that. And so that is our biggest project right now, is really trying to get that funding. And this is a little more about the Climate Justice and Green Jobs Fund. And these are just some fun little flyers we've made. And so these are why to support the Climate Justice and Green Jobs Fund. And it's because of the massive amount of climate debt every year that New Haven accumulates, and why to support it is it would reduce energy cost consumption with efficient heating technology, climate education and opportunities and service projects for New Haven students, and reducing long-term spending, so uplifting small businesses and improving community quality of life. And I just wanted to shout out a little bit on activism information. So if anyone ever feels like getting involved with New Haven Climate Movement or finding out more, you can feel free to send us an email or send me an email. It's right there on the screen. And just to emphasize that I had no climate activism experience prior to my sophomore year in high school. And it really is a great learning hands-on experience. And also just to plug some of our social media, it's just at New Haven Climate Movement to stay updated on events and organizations on our Instagram and Facebook. And I'll pass it on to whoever's doing their presentation next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kiana. So much wonderful, incredible and amazing work being done. And as for our next presentation, I think Raven, are you up next?
Hey, everybody. So thank you so much. Shout out to Kiana in New Haven Climate Movement. Adrian Huck was in LoveFed's first cohort for food justice, our food justice program, and super proud of them and amazing. Yeah, so hey everybody, Raven again, they, them, theirs, founder of LoveFed New Haven, co-deputy director currently at Black Infinity Collective, formerly known as CT Core Organized Now. And I don't have any slides or anything, but I can probably just screen share a little bit, talk about a little bit about myself, but also what brought me into activism as far as like environmental, quote unquote, environmental activism. And it really started with food justice in general. So most of my work experience, professional work experience actually has been in the hospitality industry. So I worked retail at wine stores. I've also worked in multiple restaurants, at a winery and a wine magazine, and so on and so forth over for most of my, I studied hospitality management in school, actually at Syracuse University. So it was definitely from there that I then went on and actually had a career in the wine industry and the food and beverage and hospitality industries. And those are really the places where I learned quite a bit around the kind of internal narratives and what it means to be navigating those industries, especially working at Wine Enthusiast magazine. The industry of just like and food and beverage narrative, and navigating that, just learning a lot about whose narratives were took precedent over others, and also just even the narratives as far as like Black, Indigenous, and people of color, how they were even credited to a higher standard or just valued even more when white people were telling them versus like the actual people from those communities telling them, which is still a thing that's happening, I think, in very blatant ways in all types of food network channels and all those things like that. And in food journalism, so on and so forth. But most of my life, I've experienced food apartheid. So it's also interesting. It was interesting for me to experience food apartheid firsthand for most of my life. I mean, I'm still experiencing it really when it comes down to like where I've ever lived. I've always lived in cities, whether it be between here and New York, whether it be for school or for work, living in cities, living in the hood, and where there's more corner stores than there are grocery stores, etc., and where there are more Black and brown people than there are white people. So living very closely, like experiencing food apartheid, and then also working in industries that have these really shiny narratives that only get lifted up depending on who's telling what and what they're telling, is kind of something that sparked it. But it was also always there because my great grandparents were, their parents were enslaved in the Americas, in the United States of America, and then my father's parents were farmers in Jamaica, and my father also working in the hospitality industry all of his life, being a Jamaican immigrant in the United States. So so it was really always there, but it particularly pissed me off when I was in the industry and trying to navigate this really exploitive industry that still remains such, and then trying to just make connect the dots as far as trying to make sense of it all, trying to make sense of my degree in hospitality management. Like, what the fuck does this even mean? What is it for? Why am I experiencing what I'm experiencing in this industry in these ways? And no matter where I am, I can't seem to escape these same dynamics. And so it was when I was still living in New York, actually in Brooklyn, where I got to volunteer, which was around the same time, 2012, 2013, actually, that Black Lives Matter started just as a movement in general. So the protests were happening heavily. So I was coming back from work and multiple jobs, and always being met with people going to protest in the street, and then going to protest myself, and then finding community meetings happening within Black and brown communities in different neighborhoods in Brooklyn to show up to find out more information, to find out ways that I could get involved in. So I started volunteering as far as like gardening, but also going to protests, also going to like food justice meetings, from like the Brooklyn Movement Center to the Hattie Carthen Garden in Bed-Stuy, and supporting the work of like Uprose as well. So, but long story short, in 2016, I moved back to New Haven, which is my hometown, and I was born and raised here, and still working in the hospitality industry, but also still even more deeply dissatisfied with, even more so dissatisfied with the lack of kind of activism, radical activism that I had witnessed in New York firsthand, that was also missing here, especially when it came to, when it pertained to the narratives, once again, the narratives of people experiencing food apartheid and who was telling what and who was getting grant dollars from those things. Yeah. And I was like, most of the food, quote unquote, food justice work that's happening in New Haven is being led by nonprofits that are led by mostly white people that have high turnovers of the people of color that they do hire, if they do hire them. And oftentimes they do hire them and they're not even in leadership roles. So I was in the middle of culinary school, quit my job, was in the middle of culinary school, had nothing lined up, and started Love Fed New Haven, just because I wanted to see something different. And I didn't know what that was because I didn't have experience in nonprofits. But I knew what I could do would be better than whatever the fuck was available and happening now. So that was in 2018. In February, starting Love Fed New Haven, and it's been a beautiful and wild ride. But I'm no longer operating and pushing forward Love Fed New Haven as an organization. I also think one of the biggest lessons learning from that is in trying to navigating the nonprofit industrial complex, to create it to be a quote unquote nonprofit 501c3, that it was a nightmare. And it also, the more I thought about the ways that I needed to maybe create it as an entity that was a 501c3, the more why I started Love Fed, started getting away from the mission and the vision and the radical activism that I essentially wanted to be doing. So in January 2020, I started actually as co-deputy director of Black Infinity Collective, formerly known as CT Core Organized Now. We only rebranded last month, so that's why I have to say those things together still until people get used to BIC. But I had been active within that organization too, not as a staff member, but just like as a person who was active in the food justice work that was happening. So it's really exciting to be on staff there and for us to be doing the work that we're doing. And with our rebranding, moving from just anti-racism in general to like more Black-centered, unapologetic, and particularly Black trans feminist organizing throughout the state of Connecticut. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Raven. Very, very excited for the conversations that we have to follow. I think that our last presentation is going to come from Rachel.
Hello again. Okay, there it goes. Thank you to the other two presenters. That was great, highly informative. And I'm just happy to be here with them today and with all of you. And sort of I'm in my homeland. New Haven is close to Mohegan territory too. So just to acknowledge that before I move on. And there's a lot of other tribes, the Tunxus and other tribes that have passed. And we still have Schaghticoke, Mohegan, Pequot, and Paugussett here in Connecticut, living and breathing as best we can as modern day Native nations every day after hundreds of years of colonization. And so my background, I forgot. That's how Raven and I actually know each other. And we actually bonded over the fact that we both went to hospitality school. So I had a similar experience in terms of my program specifically. I didn't really stay in the hospitality field too long, but as an undergrad, I really struggled with the program in that I was young and I didn't really understand why I hated it so much. But it was very focused on, just making the money, making the nonprofit. Um, there was no focus on sustainability. There was no focus in 2000. So starting in, 2007, I actually went to grad school after I graduated in anthropology. So I did a total switch from restaurant management, and I went to school for that in order to teach Native history from an Indigenous perspective. I was inspired by an amazing Mohawk professor when I was an undergrad. Her name is Audra Simpson, and I just never vibed with the nature of the way the hospitality program was going. I worked as a personal chef for a little bit. I was just never interested in management the way that they wanted me to be. Like, people would go off and work for Four Seasons and all these big corporations, and we didn't have like an opportunity to work for small businesses. Really, it wasn't really offered to us like in our career fairs and things like that. It was kind of like, this is what you have to do, and it just wasn't for me. And so I did my grad work, in order to be able to teach people about Indigenous cultures and learn more about Indigenous cultures other than mine throughout the world, and other cultures as well. For instance, I took an African American archaeology class, and it was a really great experience, my grad work. And I had, as traumatizing as anthropology can be for Native people, and that's a separate conversation because that field was founded on othering and writing about the other, basically writing about marginalized communities, and also taking our grave goods and our human remains and all of these other sensitive topics. So it's a field that's slowly but surely making progress. So what I did after working for the tribe for a few years, so I started working my tribal library in 2013, and it was a fantastic experience. Spent a lot of time with elders and youth. Most of the time, those were the people I was working with, running book clubs and doing story times with kids, all that kind of stuff. And, in my library, in our library, there was a little bit of lag time sometimes because it was for tribal members only. So I had always been interested in food. My background was in food. Indigenous food was slowly kind of coming on the rise. It was nowhere near as big as it is now. Winona LaDuke has had her wild rice company, Native Harvest, for at least 20 years, I believe, out of Minnesota. So that was one of the first Native food companies and sustainability kind of like initiatives in order to like revitalize the wild rice. And Winona LaDuke, as many of you know, has been like on the cutting edge for so long. Now she works with having a hemp farm, and she's trying to push other communities to get on that, kind of, to jump on that as well. But so when I was working at the tribal library, I started doing like a little blog on the Indigenous foods, and then for tribal members only, because everything there was really internal. And then my boss was kind of, letting me bring in different speakers. We started talking about, like, as it started to emerge more and more in other tribes, the food sovereignty movement was like, okay, how are we going to bring this here? Is there a way we can do this through my library work? So we had, all these cookbooks and various different books in the library that were like, well, we can bring in, some speakers and different people that'll be related. So back in 2013, we had a big event called, I think it was called Decolonizing Our Diet, something like that, partnered with the National Institute of Health. And we brought in a couple speakers. One was Anishinaabe, and actually the other one's Anishinaabe as well, but he's from Manitoulin Island, so very remote location for his tribe. And so they had different perspectives, one being a professor, the other was talking about corn soup and what that meant to his people. And so it kind of just progressed from there. Like, as I think it was 2017, I'd been doing this for a few years. I'd bring in a speaker, I would run an initiative for our youth, things like making a Three Sisters salad, incorporating corned beans and squash and showing them the health benefits of it, as well as the traditional meaning. Making, we have this traditional food called pemmican, which is dried meat blended with fat and berries. And I'm just going to show this. I have a couple things to show, but I'm not sure if it's coming up backwards. But these are Tonka bars, a Lakota run company, and they make a modern version of pemmican. So it's like jerky, but it's softer. And they're all, native made, and the profits go to returning the buffalo back to the land. So it's a really important initiative. But anyway, so I made kind of like a vegetarian version of a pemmican for the kids. It was like a dried butternut squash. I have to find that recipe if people are interested. But so we did all these different things. And of course, sometimes the youth would eat them, sometimes they wouldn't, right? You get it. A good amount of people would eat the vegetables and stuff. And then it just kept evolving. Like we're just doing stuff. And then I did the Food Solutions New England Leadership Institute. I think it was 2017. It was winter, so 2017, 2018. And Food Solutions New England looking for a more sustainable food system for New England as one of their goals. And I met so many great, food justice activists and nutritionists and so many different people, some of who are from Connecticut I still work with. And so that kind of got me more involved in the overall movement. And at one point I was partnering with some of the organizations, Leaders of Color out in Hartford, New Haven when that existed. And there was various other initiatives that I would partner with different folks on through the kind of after the Food Solutions New England Leadership Institute, because I met a lot of people. I felt like, oh, I'm not the only one in Connecticut doing this, like I'm sitting here, at my tribe, like just by myself, like trying to get this ball rolling with food sovereignty. I was like, okay, there's all different initiatives. There's, these, food justice initiatives all over the state. You just kind of have to know the people. I was actually on the board of Fresh New London for a couple years before I even started doing this work. So that's what's kind of funny. And they're a local food justice organization too. And that's where my community garden is still. So after, partnering and doing all these initiatives, I watched a webinar through First Nations Development Institute. And because I was just like, what are we really doing here? Like, this is like, I'm speaking about the topic, having other people come speak. We don't really have any land. One of the gardens was starting. There's a small garden that's still going near our government center. But I watched the webinar, and it kind of recommended, and this could be used in other contexts too, but it was kind of like getting people together that all had a vested interest in this food sovereignty topic. So basically they recommended find out in your tribe who farms, and it could be even like that they're farming pigs and cows, which are not indigenous, but find out who does those things, who plants, who is an herbalist. And so it was like, okay, I know, a bunch of people I can get together and we can kind of start a group and maybe that we can make some forward momentum on this. And so I started the Native Food Discussion Group back in 2017, and it was just Mohegans at that time, and for now it still is. I just left my job, which was my most recent job was in our tribal museum. I just left a few months ago, so technically I could open it up, and I have to decide how I want to do that now. Do I want to open it up to just local tribes? You don't want it to be too huge. So that's something I'm thinking about now that I'm no longer in that position. But the group, basically we didn't know what it was going to be really. I saw it as an initiative to kind of further food sovereignty, figure out what we were going to do. It turned out that we started on the Maple Moon in 2017. So Indigenous people, we have, multiple, what we call multiple Thanksgivings or multiple moon feast celebrations that we would celebrate since time immemorial. And I didn't grow up with those types of holidays. I grew up with just the Green Corn Festival, which is our powwow. So, there's really only one that is celebrated still in my tribe. And I talked to folks from, Tamaquag Museum, which is a Narragansett run museum in Rhode Island. They actually used to run a Native restaurant, their family. And I learned that, we all had multiple Thanksgiving, these multiple ceremonies and celebrations. And it just was something that, I had never celebrated. And so what we started doing as a group was meeting seasonally and starting on the Maple Moon and unintentionally the way it all kind of happened, but just meeting and celebrating those foods and seasons. So now hopefully we might be able to get together virtually. We've done a couple times since COVID, but now would be the return of the fish. So for instance, I just saw the post today, and we don't have as many herring here in Connecticut anymore as they do in Massachusetts. So the neighboring tribes have more, and they have more of a festival. But I just saw a friend of mine from Wampanoag post that they closed off their herring area to the public, and it's just for the Wampanoags today. You know, it's just for them to fish their herring. So they still maintain a lot of those fishing rights out there. Here in Connecticut, especially with our history of Mohegans siding with the colonists, we didn't really maintain a lot of those rights. So it's hard for people who are fishermen. And I can't speak for myself, but I've, from conversations I've had with people, it's difficult because we don't really have a space as a tribe that we could do those things anymore. But this was all really part of what the group was doing. We were just, we can't necessarily fix everything. It's myself and a core group of elders and other folks, some, a couple younger people. And we just, we're celebrating and teaching and, furthering some of the garden initiatives and doing the best that we could. Back last spring, I believe. So I was working at my tribe's museum, Tantaquidgeon Museum, the oldest native run museum in the country, founded by my great aunt and uncle, Gladys and Harold Tantaquidgeon. And my mother actually was like, well, let's write a grant. And I was like, for food sovereignty. I was like, wait, what? Like now we're doing this? Like all of a sudden now everyone, because, as we've all seen right during this pandemic, farms have been popping up everywhere and people have been learning to garden, which is really great. And it's really important, but there's even seed shortages now, right? So saving seeds is more important than ever. And so, she's working on brainstorming this, and it actually wound up being a seed saving grant. And I'm like, okay, it seems random that we're doing this now, but I guess it's not, because she was looking at it as like, we want to make sure we have job security. And also, she was looking at it that way. I was looking at it in a very different way. I was like, no, this is like to perpetuate the future generations. This is why we need to save these seeds. But we got the grant and started planting last year. And here and there we've planted heritage seeds in other spaces. So like Algonquian squash is one of the seeds. These are a couple. So we have here, this is Narragansett whitecap corn, but it's also can be called Mohegan flint corn. The tribes here, we have kinship and blood ties. I myself am Mohegan and Narragansett. So really it makes sense we'd be using the same corn, but it gets labeled Narragansett. So if you see that, and I know, I'm not sure if True Love Seeds has it, they may have that. This is an Abenaki variety. And this is what is known as Delaware Sasapsing corn. So the Mohegan people actually, we didn't always live in Connecticut. We migrated from Lenape territory and lived amongst the Lenape, so like Pennsylvania and Delaware. And then we migrated into this region after living in upstate New York for a short time. And we're talking hundreds of years before contact. So this corn has an interesting story in that Gladys Tantaquidgeon, my great-great aunt, actually had a hand in saving the seeds. So this is something that I know, my old coworker at the museum, as he continues the grant, he really wants to grow this out. It's small. This is like a normal size for it. So, what I know about this corn is that it's a ceremonial corn, and some of the things that I have read have been that it also could be used to eat during ceremonies. So, I'm trying to figure out ways to bring that back. So a lot of the work that I do with food, and specifically like the work for my tribe, as well as, elsewhere, is also just revitalization work. It's revitalizing the ceremonial components that go along with the foods, and those seasonal ties, right, that many Indigenous people and most of us, right, we just don't grow up with it in this country unless we're really taught that from a young age. You kind of have to like learn it. You know that like strawberry season, right? It's a big one. So that that one, most of us see some out there. We kind of think about it. We get those good, tasty little treasures of strawberries. And Strawberry Thanksgiving is actually one of the most important of the celebrations. Many tribes still celebrate that festival, and Iroquois specifically, you'll see a lot of beading with this. These were from my friend from Eastern Pequot, Latasha Maddox. I'll just give her a shout out. But yeah, they use them in their beading because they're highly medicinal, and because when you think about that time of year, it's that first fruit, and you'd be going the whole winter with nothing, right? So it makes sense that there's big celebrations about the Strawberry Moon and the Strawberry Festival. But yeah, so with the seed saving grant, I had William Weiss Weaver, and I know I'll get off in a second. William Weiss Weaver is a seed saver and culinary historian. I'm sure he has other titles too, but he's non-native, but I guess I would say he's an elder now, and he's out in Philadelphia area. And he was the one that my aunt passed seeds on to. And then there was another person who also passed some of these seeds, but he had various indigenous people giving him seeds to grow back in the 70s because they didn't have any land to grow them. And they saw this as an opportunity to perpetuate their seeds. And so it was pretty amazing. A couple years ago, I went out to Philly to do a presentation at the Philadelphia Free Library and got to meet him and, learn kind of more about his interactions with my great aunt and kind of the story that I'm sharing with you today. And I've been, in all my presentations now, I'm like, oh, buy some Delaware Flint. And a lot of people are buying this blue corn. I don't know if they're eating it, whatever's being done with it, right? It's important that we're perpetuating the seed. And there's so many people these days, who are doing, not so many, but there's a lot of important people doing seed saving work and also rematriation work, which is specifically returning the seeds to the mother, so to the tribe. So Owen Taylor from True Love Seeds is one of our allies. So I mentioned him because he's been a great resource and ally for me over the years with all of these projects. I've even brought him in to do some seed saving demos, and it's just one day at a time. We will just keep pushing to make this world a more sustainable and better place for the future generations. So thank you to Butney, and I guess we will continue with the questions.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Rachel. Definitely agree that the food justice and food sovereignty movements are definitely coming to their own, especially I feel, as you mentioned, with the coronavirus pandemic. And also, please do feel free to drop in the chat the name of your friend who made your beautiful earrings, as well as where people can also buy some seeds of their own. Yes, thank you so much to all of our panelists for talking a little bit about yourselves and your work. We're now going to take this time to move into a bit of conversation and some questions that we thought of a little bit beforehand. And we're just going to start off by talking generally about the environmental justice movement. And I just wanted to ask what the environmental justice, what it means to each of you individually, and what would it look like? And I know that we've talked a little bit about food justice itself and also climate activism, as they're all intertwined. So I just wanted to start off with that.
Yeah, I can start it off and then pass it on. So for me, the idea of environmental justice and climate justice is really about accessibility. So I definitely echoing what Raven said, not just in the food industry or the food justice industry and nonprofit industry, but I've seen that a lot in climate activism and such. The demographic is stereotypically older, a white demographic. And I definitely think that climate justice and environmental justice is about bringing awareness and opportunities to lower income communities, communities of color, and especially when we're talking about innovation, because I think that definitely climate change is very scary because of the threat it imposes, but it's also a great opportunity for us to see how we can improve ourselves, and different opportunities in how we can create a sustainable future, a cleaner future, while giving people jobs, while perpetuating neighborhood resiliency and such. So I think it's really about making sure that all communities are included in this conversation as well. So what does climate change mean for Fairhaven or Dixwell when we're talking about New Haven? So I would say it, for me at least, it's really about accessibility and making sure that these communities aren't left out in the conversation. And I'll pass it on to another panelist.
I've really been kind of just like in the headspace, especially lately in the past few weeks and months, especially in reflection of just like Earth Day, Earth Week, those meanings and what they mean to whom. And just like words and linguistics around just like environmental justice and like what like when we use words like these, like who it actually resonates with. And so environmental, when I'm thinking of just like what I think of environmental justice is not necessarily like, I wouldn't even necessarily always use environmental justice. Like I will use environmental justice maybe sometimes if I'm talking with like students like yourselves or funders or whomever else. But in working with Black people, especially intergenerationally, and especially with just the public education system, for example, being what it is, and illiteracy rates, even in a place like the city of New Haven, actually being like really high, particularly with older people. I wouldn't say environmental justice, like I would say other things. And so I would use other words in order to like communicate what environmental justice means. But with that being said, I mean, it's everything. I'm still struggling with like even talking about food justice. Like so many people label the work that I do in particular as food justice, and I also see it beyond food justice. And that's because it's more complicated, like systems of justice, like actual systems of justice, not like theoretical ones or the criminal justice system that is actually like everything, but is like all of these things are intersected, obviously. And I think a lot of like Black, Indigenous people of color like know these things to be true in our communities. And it's kind of just like even simple jargon, I would say, is like environmental justice, like simple jargon that really catches people, that it's just like, I don't know what that is, except we do. We know what it is when it means like land, like Malcolm X quote around land being based on revolution, and that we just don't have access to land, like that capitalism being the system that it is the same system that like has literally enacted violence such as like indigenous genocide, and also enslavement of Black peoples and death. And that still continues because it's only really evolved. It's never ever actually gone away. Like the country built its economy off of slavery and genocide, and then also still like, especially through the pandemic, for anyone watching the news and things like that, like you see it so blatantly, like as there were so many reports, I mean, empty grocery shelves. And then you also see reports of just like people who workers at Tyson chicken food plants getting carried out in mass on gurneys to the hospital because of the lack of care around the COVID-19 protocols that they had, as they were making more workers work, like workers work more for the pay that they're getting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, like all these things intersect, and I just like try to connect to the experiences that people have around them. So like the very real experiences that people, myself included, like it started with, I'm not satisfied with what I'm seeing in my environment, and I understand how it's actually impacting me. So what are the changes that need to happen based on like where I am because of this perspective that I'm holding, and these perspectives that I'm actually engaged in conversation with other people around in ways that like other people are not willing to go to the extent to engage in conversation about, and which is also really important, especially as we like imagine forward into like better systems and things like that. Just like simple engagement and conversation is so devalued. It's like kind of wild because it's also like not that hard, but but it is. So it's just wild in the way that like people want to just be like, oh, we did a survey or we did a thing. Like I literally was on a call, I kid y'all not, and this is why y'all better never ever, like, please, academic institutions only teach you to colonize, okay? I don't care what your degree is, the degree is colonization. So please be aware of how you move up and through community wherever you are, especially if you are not of that community. Humble yourself. Like, I was on a call only a couple weeks ago with one of y'all's colleagues, a Yale student, who expressed wanting to do an initiative around community fridges. And I'm like, cool, you know what I'm saying? But like, who asked for them? It's like, oh, like no one asked for them, but like, because I'm walking from this academic building to the cafe, and every time I'm walking past there, somebody's asking me for money. And then you only talk to other students around you. And then so like y'all thought it was a good idea from there to do community fridges that no one asked for, that you actually did not do the work of engaging with the people who are asking you for money. So like, for the sake of what? For the sake of what? And you're not even going to be here after a year. So like, just like you're better off studying and then going about your business. You are. Like, if you're not just like showing up to what already exists in the communities that are here, that through their lived experiences are experiencing the worst impacts from the pandemic and other pandemics on top of that, like COVID-19, then you're better off studying and then going about your business. Like, do not create nonsensical things. Engagement is like so key. It's so key. And without it, like there's no actual purpose in what you're doing if you're actually not engaging. But yeah, academic institutions just teach y'all to colonize. So just please don't do that. And so does the nonprofit industrial complex, which is why I'm so mad that I have to engage with it to a certain level to do the work that even that I'm doing. But okay, I'll stop there and then let Rachel go.
I don't even know. Is the screen going back to me? I can't tell what happens here. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, what environmental justice what does it mean or what it looks like? I guess what it could look like was the question. And thank you so much, Raven, for your words. I think, yeah, we can, we all experience this to some extent. Like, yeah, it's feeling like you're gonna find out the needs of the community without asking them their needs. That's always a good plan. You know, and so, yeah, I experienced this quite a bit with Indigenous folks as well. A lot of people want to partner, but they don't know how to partner or if we actually want to partner with them. So that's part of it. And with the history of my people, like kind of like I was saying about anthropology as a field, you know, museums at these institutions literally have like our sacred objects, in a lot of cases, human remains, and it's not just of Indigenous people. There were slave remains recently found at Harvard. You know, and not to get into that too much, but these are reasons why the trauma still exists. These things have not been, these reparations have not been fully made. There is a law in place, NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, since 1990, but that only applies to Native Americans in this country. It doesn't even apply to any other communities, even Indigenous Peruvians or anyone else. So, you know, basically museums are just keeping this stuff until they have to give it back. And so, yeah, this is where, you know, both my fields collide, right, in a way, because it's all problematic and it's like it all needs a lot of work and it can't just be an overnight fix. And that's what I think some people think. They think they could just like, oh, let's just hire one person to fix this, and it just doesn't work. So yeah, in terms of environmental justice, like I hate to look at my notes, but you know, I was just kind of thinking when I was thinking about the question, yeah, I mean, live in a mindset where we, you know, we care for our earth, right? Our Mother Earth and the living beings, all of the living beings on this earth every single day. You know, the mindset, right? People say every day is Earth Day, the mindset of just, you know, living in harmony with the planet on a daily basis. And I know that, you know, Raven and I both do some herbal work. And I think, you know, even being in some of those spaces helped me with my mindset even more so. The beginning of the pandemic for me, I was at the Florida Herbal Conference and right before it started. And so that was a safe space, an amazing time. We were in bunks, you know, with roommates, and it was a week before COVID, like everything shut down. So I am so, so grateful to have been at that conference. And just being around people who, you know, we're talking about, and the herbal community has had its own issues with overharvesting and things like that. But it was a lot of, you know, just people with like-mindedness and thinking about like, you know, how can we pick these plants and use these herbs in a way that is sustainable, you know, for the future, right? So that's a huge part of it. And living like, and even using the plants, right? Like even using natural medicine, which is a big part of what I do, like using these herbs as ways to boost your immunity during this time and all of these things. So a lot of what I was doing during COVID, and Raven spoke to some of the, you know, the issues that were happening in, you know, Black and Brown communities. I'm only one person, so I didn't go crazy and like try to give out care packages to tons of people. But I know that you know, there were some other Indigenous orgs that did give out quite a few. But I did for anybody that I knew that had COVID, I gave a care package of herbs. And my great aunt medicine woman, Gladys Tantaquidgeon, she you know, she wrote a book, which is in this space somewhere, I could grab it after. She was an ethnobotanist. And, you know, so I spent time growing some of these herbs during COVID for the first time. And some of them are things that would grow again and still grow wild, but, you know, the access to land for a lot of us and, you know, deforestry and all the things that have happened make it harder and harder. So this, try not to ruin it, but this is boneset. And this is a highly medicinal wildflower. And this was my great aunt's favorite plant. So, you know, of course, blessed to have connections with the organic farmers and people, but he, I believe his name is Daniel McPhee, donated a bunch of bone set to the tribe and actual plants, like through the mail. He sent me plants. I was so surprised they made it, and grew these plants, and then utilized some of them for my care packages, saved some here, like here. And traditionally it was used for the flu. It was actually used during the Spanish flu 100 years ago, and in Mohegan communities, Penobscot communities, they used it as a type of a cure back then. So it's something that a lot of us have been giving out to people that are sick, to help. And the directions were always to drink it warm at night and cold in the morning. Honestly, I've never drank it cold, but that's what you're supposed to do, apparently, according to my great aunt. And yeah, I don't want to keep any more time. Let's move on to the next question, but I just wanted to kind of show that.
No, thank you so much, all three of you. Such wonderful and insightful and very relevant responses. Definitely. I feel as if the environmental justice movement, climate activism has, at times, people don't realize that it really is as intersectional and intertwined as you mentioned, Raven, and you as well, Rachel, just that. So I think that's something very important for everyone to keep in mind. And also, of course, the problem of privatized institutions or just institutions in general, and the I want to say incentive or desire to go out and start new things rather than really assessing like what is needed. How could we best serve the communities that we're a part of or the communities that we'd like to help, rather than really centering ourselves. And I think that this goes a bit into the next question that we're going to be talking about, which is just talking about the intersection of environmental justice, as we've been talking about it, and like racial and economic justice, and specifically like how can we work towards addressing these issues together and centering the communities who are affected the most, which I think we've touched on a little bit, but definitely would like to hear a little more.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna be that person. I was like, yes. I was like, can you drop it in the chat?
I was like, are you? You want me to go first?
Yeah, I was like, this is such a big question. You take it away.
I don't necessarily have an answer, but yeah, I think that, as we spoke a little bit, and Raven spoke specifically about, the food justice world intersecting with environmental justice, and again, even the terminology, like just to touch on that, like I was told I couldn't even use the word food sovereignty working group at my tribe, so I had to call it Native Food Discussion Group, because again, yeah, it's like those terminologies, like if they're not using even that, right, like, or it's like environmental justice, they would probably understand like sustainability, right? It's a different world. Like there's so many terms that are in each field, whether it's like the world of food justice, the world of environmental justice. It's like we need to all speak to each other, in a common language. And I found in my work, it's been something that keeps coming up. Like I was trained, in anthropology and in the food world. And so in anthropology, like, you're writing a paper about a community, right? You want to be as specific as possible. Like you're writing like a Mohegan community or like a Jamaican Maroon community. Like you have to be like specific. And then I entered the food justice world, which was like, a lot of these different terms, broad terms that not everybody knows, and not everybody knows the anthropological terms. So it's like, yeah, I think that's something that I work with and for in my work, is like when I give a lecture, I try to make sure that everybody can understand, what's going on, speaking in like a common basic English to some extent, but I do think these terms are important. So with the question that you're asking, I think, again, you know, from my background, I look at it mostly as food justice, but it's also racial justice. It's also anti-racist work. It's also all different things. You know, I'm doing decolonization work. And so it all relates to economic justice, because when you look at, as Raven stated, how this country was founded, you know, the genocide of indigenous people, and then bringing in, you know, African farmers and, you know, to man the land, you know, stealing people, you know, from Africa to be enslaved here. It's so hard to even, you know, get some people to even process that actually happened and that it is a problem. That's step one, that both of those two things, you know, happened, and our whole system was built on those things. And so, you know, whether it's a marginalized community of any type, there's that food apartheid is real. And my own tribe, the Mohegan, we were lucky because we have a successful business operation, so we don't struggle with poverty as much as many tribes, but we do, and we did in the past. And my grandmother loves to tell me stories about how lucky I am, which I totally appreciate. And you know, how they had, like, back then, like, there was no option then to like just grow your own corn, right? But now, you know, we're in a time where people are trying to take steps forward, but they have to look at that original big picture of, like, this is literally how this place was created, right? This is how this country was created. None of these people wanted to be put in these positions that they were put in and put down. And so, you know, you see food apartheids, you know, here, there, and everywhere, because that was purposely done. They were purposely put down. So if you look at like reservations, you know, I've been to in Minnesota, for instance, and even closer, we're talking, you know, there's even places that are poverty struck, like just a couple hours down the road. You know, they don't have anything more than a corner store either, or sometimes not even that. You know, sometimes they have, you know, you have to drive an hour to even get to a corner store. And their one grocery market is Walmart, and that's like an hour and a half away. And so, you know, this is purposeful. I mean, first of all, there's the concept of like a lot of native tribes are being removed from their homelands and put on the Badlands, which, like, at Lakota, they literally call them the Badlands. Like, that's what they call where they live. And you know, I think they kind of embrace it. But yeah, it's like, well, they get put in the places where you can't barely plant, right? You can't plant, you can't fish, you can't do anything in these spots. And then they're way remote, you know, from even a healthy market. I mean, when I was in Minnesota, I think it was like $4 or something for avocados when I was looking at the prices of these, like, you know, little shops, and it was just like so crazy. And I was like, okay, well, I'm definitely in the middle of it right now. And so I think that people need to be aware, like, first and foremost, of the history, and the education aspect is really important, I think, with all of these things, like getting people to know, like, okay, you know, this is the evolution of, like, whether it's our environment and, you know, how we got to where we got to here with destroying the ozone layer and all of that, or whether it's our industrialized agriculture, which is, again, interlinked. How do we get to that? Like, you know, the seed companies that only emerged 100 years ago, not even, right? Like, before that, we were all saving seeds. We were all perpetuating our own seeds. We were living more sustainably than, even, not to say it was perfect 100 years ago, but, you know, those companies emerged, and then it became just one more thing, that one more corporate thing, right? And then there's so much that we could all talk about with the seeds, right? With the modification and the health benefits of, like, if there's like an heirloom seed and the benefits of that plant versus something that's like modified. And so there's so much that it all relates to, because it's like, when you look at how we were living as Indigenous people for hundreds of years, you know, we weren't perfect. And I know that, you know, that can be an image that can come up, but, you know, we had a way to live with our environment, whether it was the, you know, the natural deforestation where we would burn, you know, areas so that we could plant. And now that's even coming back in some of the sustainable agriculture circles. I was really proud to see a tribe out in Wisconsin doing it. So that was really cool. So whether it was, those systems that were in place, it's going to take a long time to even get anywhere close to what things were like even 200 years ago in terms of like where the land and the landscape was at. And that's a real problem, because in order for us as various communities to like heal ourselves, we need the land, we need healthy food, and we need also like a healthy ecosystem too, like the actual landscape around. Like in New England, it's been colonized for 400 years. And so, my great aunt would say that a lot of the plants that are in her book, like they don't even hold the same medicinal value, and I can't say one way or the other on certain things. I'm not as much of an expert, but that's because of all the destruction that has happened and all of the change and all the chemicals that have been put into this, so it's one day at a time. But I think that definitely, in order to get people to be able to sustain themselves and eat healthy from these marginalized communities, there needs to be a lot more work towards, equity and racial justice to even get to that point. Because right now, as Raven was saying, people are just kind of, oh, well, let's do something to maybe help. But it's like, well, I think like the people know what they need more than you do, right? So, so that's the way, you kind of have to look at it going forward.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I also just want to, I do just want to say, I know it's only like 13 minutes left, I think, of like the time allotted for this. And I just wanted to give Kiana the chance to respond to this question, because I know when I respond, it's gonna be winded. So just want to offer that up to you, Kiana.
Thank you. No problem with it being long-winded. I definitely think that this is a very expansive question, and a lot of things can be said about it. And even me, I'm still learning about these different things, because it's not exactly something that is taught in schools or something that is very widespreadly talked about. And so I really appreciate all of your responses, Rachel and Raven, with sort of these topics, because it is a great learning experience. And just thinking about these intersections, because intersectionalism is something that's been talked about a lot, and it is a very expansive, broad topic when it comes to environmental justice and climate justice. And I would say that for New Haven climate movement, at least, putting the emphasis on New Haven as a very diverse area, and trying to make sure, like I answered in the previous question, just trying to make sure that we are thinking of all communities and trying to engage in communities, and making sure that these voices aren't shut out. And I think a lot of the work that comes with racial and economic justice is realizing how at least climate change, environmentalism and climate change as an intersection, how the threats of climate change affect these communities. And not even so much of like calling them just vulnerable low-income communities, but also trying to preserve these cultures. So I know for at least in Honduras, with having usually poor infrastructure and the threats that storms pose in Honduras, it's really scary to think about how these cultures that my parents have grown up with and beyond are at risk because of these effects, such as stronger and more frequent storms. And so when I think about how we can have climate change and that in conversation together, it's really about making those investments in these communities to make sure that they can be part of the climate conversation and still reap the benefits that we can have when we're addressing climate change. So I think it is a very long process, and like Rachel has been saying, it is one day at a time, and it really is trying for New Haven Climate Movement, at least, to get our local officials to really recognize not just the urgency of climate change, but who climate change affects directly and first, and really trying to address those things as best as we can, and really trying to make sure that when we're talking about climate change, it is a more expansive topic than just sort of this single-minded idea that climate change only affects a certain amount of people, and that only a certain demographic should be in the climate conversation. So yeah, definitely trying to keep it in conversation. And I agree with Raven that sometimes often the most engaging educational experiences are colloquial and very community engagement conversation. And yeah, I'll pass it off to Raven to answer the question.
I'm not gonna lie, y'all. I'm still like very anxious and stressed about this question because it's so big, and I know like we only have 9 minutes now. But okay. So, what would you seek on the intersection of environmental justice and racial economic justice? Specifically, how can we work towards addressing these issues together? Yeah, there's so much, yeah, I, even just now in this moment, I just like am feeling the weight of, Ma'Khia Bryant, murder, this past week, that happened in the same day that the verdict for the police officer that murdered George Floyd came out, and just the and so like I'm just like literally feeling yet again that I've also been feeling this week and throughout this pandemic of just like this overwhelming grief just like wash over me. And holding that grief with also like a question like how can we work towards addressing issues around environmental justice and racial and economic justice? And it's just quite a bit. Like it's just a lot. A lot of it seems like that kind of feeling it's easy for anything, for even somebody to answer this question, for like anything to like just feel impossible, to just feel like that you can't get through the day. Never mind like imagining what could be happening tomorrow, or in what could be happening for descendants of yours decades from now. It's hard. It's very difficult to hold all of those things together. And but that being said, I mean, like what keeps me going is that I'm just like, even if it were to be impossible, like I have to be doing something to make sure that if there is a chance that I'm in the right spaces, doing the right type of work, and in the right conversations, to make sure that if it's possible, then it's happening. And reminding myself that like liberation isn't a destination, it's a practice. And so every day we choose to practice being free. Every day we choose to practice being free for ourselves, and in beginning with ourselves, we provide an example, a real life example for whoever we come into contact with, however we come into contact with them, what freedom is and how it feels. And that is transformative. And that is like very powerful. There and speaking of power, like I believe in people power. My mother named me what she named me, particularly my last name. My middle name, I take a lot of pride in, because I was born in March 1990, a month after Nelson Mandela was freed from prison. And so my mother chose to name me Amandla, which means power in Zulu. And there's power in naming, and that is an Afro-Indigenous practice. And there's power like in people, and there's people power. Like Mandla Wetu is like what they're saying in the streets, and that is people power. Like that is also like so many movements for liberation that have been happening even prior to colonialization, as we know, imperialism as we know it, at least. But yeah, as long as we are able to wake up, like, and we have to like just keep continuing to choose freedom, and it starts with us. And then other people around us get transformed by us choosing freedom. And it takes a lot of freaking work to even wake up to choose freedom, because it just it feels overwhelming, and it feels like sometimes it even feels isolating, especially when you're trying to do it in the communities of people that are actually like your people. Like, you know, like colonialism and its impacts are really deep and violent, and the decolonializing process that needs to take place is so real. It's so real. And that term, even, and people using it so commonly as they do now, is only recent. It's only freaking recent. Rachel talking about rematriation, I only heard that term for the first time 2 years ago. I was at the Young Farmers Conference, and Rowan White was a keynote speaker there at the Young Farmers Conference that took place in I forget what town in New York, but at Stone Barn, Bluestone. Rachel, you know what I'm talking about, culinary. Is it Blue
Are you talking
Stone
about
Barn?
Soulfire or a different place?
Stone Barn.
I don't know if I've been there.
Stone Barn. Oh, you haven't? Okay, yeah. It's anyway, it's real bougie. It's like the cutting edge of farming in America, and you know, sustainability. It's basically just like a bunch of white people, you know what I'm saying, woo woo rah rah. We're doing like amazing things around like the future of farming and agriculture. It's just like everything that like Indigenous and Black people have been doing, but just like regurgitated, and you know, the end they make a bunch of money of it. They have a farm. It's on Rockefeller land. Also, that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. And like, and they have a restaurant, another thing. So, but usually in person, they have the Young Farmers Conference there actually, and it never really changed location. But that's the first time I even heard about rematriation in Rowan White's keynote speech. And Rowan White, for those of you who don't know, is a seed keeper and farmer from the Mohawk community of Akwesasne. Akwesasne. Thank you for the correction. And it's like definitely, as far as like seed keeping and on a national level, like, yeah. But that's the first time I heard of it, and it was amazing to me But in just thinking about all of these intersections and how we like are in conversation with one another about what the needs are, who we're talking to about that, like, because I'm definitely in a place personally where I'm thinking like beyond like, okay, who do I need to be communicating to like these funders and stuff like that. Like I already know that language also, so I don't even, but like how am I thinking about how am I actively learning about the needs within community in general, and then also how am I taking that learning and and then doing my own learning, whatever that needs is, in order to like communicate to community members what they need to know in order to like empower themselves and remind themselves of the agency that they very well have, that this society convinces us that we don't have any agency whatsoever, and that our minds and our bodies and our spirits even are just totally just everything's just up for delegation and policy and all this, et cetera, et cetera. I have no faith whatsoever, especially with the climate change timeline that we keep seeing pushed out all the time by young folks, such as young folks in the New Haven climate movement and elsewhere, who are actually at the forefront being like, this is the timeline that we have. There's not time. We're out of time. We've been out of time. And I don't particularly have any faith whatsoever in the systems that exist, especially politically, that anything is gonna, if anything, it's harm reduction. Whatever it is, it's gonna be harm reduction, but it's not gonna be anything, I think, that is going to be the shift, that is going to be the like monumentous shift that actually needs to happen in order for us to really be good, to really, really, really be good, to really be looking out for one another. I think that's going to be people divesting from things that do not serve us anymore, and that includes our government, and that includes this whack ass economy. And I don't know what all the things are that are going to take us to get there. But back to my point about the rematriation is like, and being it's so important about language, and that word in particular, that term being coined by Indigenous women, about that kind of thing. I've also been thinking about the correlation actually between rematriation and then like womanism, which is a term that was coined by Alice Walker. So really quick, if y'all still have time, I don't know why. Sorry, yo, my mom's calling me right now and I feel real bad. I have to decline this. But do we have some moments? I'm about to wrap up. Okay. I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna try to wrap up real quick. I mean, like, it's not gonna be as quick as y'all want it to, but like, please hang with me, y'all. I know y'all have to volunteer. Listen, it's all in due time. It's all gonna happen. But like, the correlation between rematriation, and I'm actually looking, Rachel, at Eastern Woodlands rematriation's definitions right now. So we believe in the process of rematriation supports the expression of our power from within. This expression is reciprocal and in generosity to our relatives. And then also rematriation repowers our people and allows us to remember that we believe that it takes what it takes to live healthy, balanced lives by centering Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, as medicine people, midwives, and food producers. We are rematriating our food and economic systems in a way that's more resilient and just. And so I think of that, and it reminded me of the correlation of Alice Walker's 1983 definition of womanism. There were multiple definitions, but one of them is womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. You can look at that at another point in time, but basically, womanism is a social change perspective rooted in Black women and other women of colors, and I would now say updated now to be like also gender nonconforming, um, everyday experiences and everyday methods of problem solving in everyday spaces extended to the problem of ending all forms of oppression for all people, restoring the balance between people and the environment, nature, and reconciling human life with the spiritual dimension. So that's really all I have to give. I'm still thinking about it, and I'm just gonna end it on that note. I thank y'all for having me.
No, of course. Thank you so much. I feel as if, of course, much more conversations to be had and many more thoughts for the future and wonderful conversations for the future. But unfortunately, this is all the time that we have. But again, I would like to thank our panelists so much for being here with us. A round of applause, virtual round of applause for our panelists, please. And before we head out, we do have a few announcement about volunteering opportunities for this afternoon.
So hey guys, I can start off. So the main two volunteering locations we have are Common Ground and Little Red Pin. So the Common Ground volunteering site is at Common Ground High School. And as a whole, Common Ground is a center for environmental learning and leadership. It's a place where all members of the community, young and elementary age children, middle, high school, general public, and environmental practitioners can find connections to the local environment, each other, and opportunities for learning and engagement. So Common Ground High School has, or Common Ground School has a urban farm, which is where we're going to be sending volunteers today. And if you sign up to volunteer, you should have gotten an email with more specific directions. But yeah, and then I'll pass it on to, I think, either V or Sunny to talk about Little Red Hen, but also just wanted to thank you guys, the panelists, Kiana, Rachel, and Raven so much. I really enjoyed hearing everything that you guys had to say. And then especially like the rematriation and womanism connection, that was really cool, and like liberation as practice and not a destination, and choosing freedom for ourselves. So I really enjoyed that. So thank you so much. And I'll pass it to Sunny, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you all, Belle, Kiana, Rachel, and Raven. Y'all are all awesome. I learned so much from all of y'all. I just wanted to take V's place in saying a little bit about Little Red Hen, which is the other volunteer site that we're sending people to right now. It's an autonomous garden created to build community cohesion and to address food insecurity. And so when they work with their neighbors and share their concerns, especially about violence and expanding green spaces and putting more people into open green spaces, Little Red Hen Garden makes a difference. And when V got in, or sorry, when the founder got involved, it was actually the year with the highest rate of homicides and shootings, unfortunately. And so they kind of they were inspired to make this garden to put beauty where people don't expect it and to be able to reduce violence and improve community relations. I think that we're running short of time, but I think Kiana and Raven wanted to say a little bit about their respective organizations. And if y'all don't want to, because we're short on time, no worries either.
Yeah, I can just pop some links in the chat. So I'll put New Haven Climate Movement's website, and then also a link to our Climate Justice Green Jobs Fund and our Climate Justice Schools proposal and their respective petitions if anyone wants to check them out. And yeah, I'll pass it to Raven.
Yeah, next week, actually, just following Black Infinity Collective on social media, blackinfinitycollective.org is our website. So you can, I'll try to actually drop it in a link. You can go to our website, find the link to our newsletter and stuff like that. But we'll also be doing like our work to our fundraising or stay tuned for that media newsletter, and give, if you can, share with other people. And I dropped it in the chat also that Rachel and I will be in conversation again with among other amazing global majority organizers who have been doing mutual aid prior to the pandemic. We'll be in conversation again for the International Festival of Arts and Ideas that's based in New Haven. And it's going to be on Wednesday, June 2nd. Listen, the time is slipping my mind. Anyway, Wednesday, June 2nd, I dropped the link. Y'all can go visit and register for the event. But that's another time that we'll be in conversation with other people. And the theme is the legacy and future of love as liberation. So